So when I first went down there, mid 2000s, I was just so amazed because I was watching all the Americans there drinking rum, smoking cigars. It was more of a social activity. And I was like, I must be a nerd because I'm going in bookshops and I'm just like first edition prints. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, nobody's seeing what I'm seeing.
Hello, print friends, and welcome to the 54th episode of Pine Copper Lime, the internet's #1 printmaking podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. I release weekly podcasts with people in the print world who are doing something a bit beyond the expected. So please subscribe on your podcast listening app of choice. You can also find Pine Copper Lime on Instagram and Facebook, and you can sign up for our monthly newsletter with print news from around the world, all at pinecopperlime.com. We also have a Patreon page, where, if you like this podcast and you want to give us a couple bucks a month, we love you for it, and it makes a world of difference to us. Thank you so much to those who have signed up, even in the time of COVID, even in the time of quarantine. You are filling my heart. Printmaking forever, shun the non-believers. This episode of Pine Copper Lime is brought to you by our sponsor, Speedball Art Products, who've been bringing you a diverse range of high-quality products to your creative practice since 1997. Their newest exciting initiative is Speedball's Print Posse. Working with contemporary printmaking icons, Speedball has invited each artist to design and name an ink of their choosing. Artists like Killjoy, star of Pine Copper Lime episode number 36, whose ancient clay relief ink is a stunning warm clay color, perfect for hanging in the studio on these late days of summer. Shop at speedballart.com to find out where you can pick up a can of your new favorite. My guest this week is Newton Paul. Newton is a collector and researcher of African American and Cuban prints from both contemporary and historical artists. And print friends, get your pen and paper out for this one. Newton is a fountain of knowledge and resources when it comes to these subjects, and you're going to learn about incredible new printmakers you'd never heard of before. I've put links as much as I can to everything in the show notes. Newton shares with us how a chance encounter at the Harlem Fine Art Show started him on his journey into the world of printmaking, his travels to Cuba and working in the archives there, and the thrill of discovery forgotten and lost histories in 20th-century printmaking. I had a teensy bit of audio trouble on this one, so Newton's track has a slight buzz, but stay with me, print friends. It goes away in the first 5 minutes. I promise. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to dive into those archives with Newton Paul. Hi, Newton. How's it going?
It is going well, Miranda. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this discussion with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat. It's interesting because I don't know that I've ever had anyone on the podcast before who basically met how we met, which is we just got to chatting on Instagram Messenger, and I started to hear all these projects that you're doing, and I thought, people need to know about this. So I'm really excited to get to know you a little bit better and to hear about everything you're doing. And I'm hoping before we dive in, you'd be okay giving a little introduction of yourself, which I usually call the who you are, where you are, what you do questions.
Okay. Well, first, before I begin, I just want to thank you again for reaching out and working with me to kind of share this information. And thank you for your contribution to the printmaking movement. I think this is really a good way to keep pushing the agenda and getting printmaking on the map even further.
Well, thank
you. There was a quote that came to mind on how we connected, and the quote is by Rumi, is, "What you seek is seeking you."
Yeah.
for the life of me, just connecting with you after seeing that write up was just one of the best things that could have happened for me in terms of, again, contributing to the printmaking movement. Yeah, so my name is Newton Paul. I'm the founder of the Armand Paul Family Collection based in New York. Historically, previously, I worked in pharmaceuticals and was laid off approximately 4 years ago. But during that time, prior to getting laid off, I was actually involved with the MoMA Friends of Education Board for 3 years. I'm currently on the El Museo del Barrio board in New York, which was actually paramount in the exhibition of Belkis Ayan, the contemporary Cuban printmaker, the master printmaker. And I'm also currently on the Print Club of New York board as acting secretary. And so that's my current role.
How did you come to printmaking? So it sounds like, you had this uh, opportunity when you found you were no longer to be working in pharmaceuticals to kind of transition some of your focus to art. But how did printmaking sort of rise to the top of that interest?
Well, the first print I actually was exposed to was on a show on ABC um, in New York called Like It Is with Gil Noble. And this show was particularly focused on Black culture and Black experiences. And during the show, in the beginning of the show before it started, you would hear these drums going in the background. And then this print would zoom to the camera. And once the print got to the front of your screen, the drums would stop and the show would start. And I was in elementary school at the time. And that print was actually Charles White's work. So I was able to find out the history behind that, but I could get into that a little later. But and then the next part of really connecting with printmaking was my first acquisition at the Harlem Fine Art Show in 2009 by an artist named Kevin Williams, and he's on Instagram, Art by Wak, W-A-K. And it was a piece of a woman that was scrubbing the floor, and within the wood was ingrained the image of a slave ship. And I stood in front of the piece for about 40 minutes, maybe 30 minutes to, I don't know how long it was, but it was a long time. And then tears started to stream out of my eyes because it touched something in me, and it just reminded me of, my mother, immigrants from Haiti, and she used to do this type of work for families that had a lot of money. And so I would always think about those times that she wasn't around because I would see her leaving in the uniform. And during that time that I was studying the piece, the owner of the Black Arts in America, Najee Dorsey, walks over to me and he's asking me questions about the piece. And I shared my thoughts, and he said, all right, I'll give you some time with it. He walked away, and then he came back, and he's like, I think you should get it. And I bought it. That was like my first major piece, and I still look at it today, and it still gives me that emotional feeling and the beauty of it after, acquiring this work and thinking that I do the right thing because I paid a lot of money. I've never thought about paying art at that level. And they sent me a very nice, classy note, him and his wife, congratulating me on my first acquisition, and I was hooked. Like, that was like the first piece that really struck me. And then as I started to research more, I came across a book, African American Artists from 1929 to 1945, Prints, Drawings, and Paintings, which was donated to the Met Museum by Reba and Dave Williams, who are two prominent collectors. I mean, Dave Williams passed away, but Reba is still writing. But that was the first time that the Met Museum had such a large acquisition of African American prints. So as I started to research that book and study it, I was looking at all these artists, Ernest Critchlow, Elizabeth Catlett, Charles White. I mean, it was Henry Tanner, just a huge amount of experts that were never given that recognition. And this was like the first time on that platform to be exposed at that level. So after I read that book, they came out with another book called Small Victories, One Couple's Surprising Adventure to Collecting American Prints. And it was just everything. So they talked about collecting American prints, African American prints, Mexican prints, and Mexican printmaking has a huge history. And my next exposure to that was Philadelphia Museum when they did the Frida Kahlo Mexican Revolution exhibition, and seeing those prints just blew my mind. Like, just the context of socialism, American capitalism, and some of these other societal issues and political viewpoints that were captured in the work. So that was like when I wasn't buying anything. I was just getting engulfed into it. And then I read a few more books, Black Printmakers and the WPA by Leslie King, Collecting African American Art by Halima Ta, and David Driscoll, rest in peace, artist and scholar. And the last book is African American Printmaking, 1838 to Present, which was curated by Lena Hugh and Dr. Cynthia Hawkins. And Dr. Cynthia Hawkins is paramount to the next phase of trying to show the Association de Grabadores of Cuba prints that I have over time. And, I benchmarked other collectors like Dr. Richard Sims, who had collected one of the largest collections of Katie Kollwitz, and he donated it all to the Getty Museum. And I was just reading about him. I never heard about him, but when I read his history, I was like, man, that's me. That's the first time for me to acquire a large amount of Cuban prints from that particular period. I'm actually in that realm of trailblazing it and getting this out to the people. So I'm just trying to figure that out right now.
Yeah. That's that's an incredible story. And I feel like all of those books that you mentioned, I'm just like furiously scribbling the names of them. So I'll have to put them in the show notes because I feel like people will really be interested in maybe coming across and reading some of those books themselves. Because one of the things about printmakers is that printmakers love the history of printmaking. I think it's so interesting because I don't necessarily see that in other media. Maybe that's just because I'm not as involved in it, but almost every printmaker I know, like, they love Dürer, they love Goya, they love reading and writing about it. I don't know if, like, ceramicists feel the same way, where they're still looking at 16th and 17th century works and saying, oh, that was some glorious ceramics,
Right.
So they love that. So when I go back through, I'll see if I can pop some of that in the show notes, some of the names of those books, because I definitely want to see them.
Another critical piece with Reba and Dave Williams, they actually created a print movie which nobody really knew about, and it was called, I believe, All About the Prints. And they interview some of the curators in London and getting this whole context, this history of printmaking, which was fascinating because I think they were actually the first ones to actually put a documentary type style to it.
Oh, I'd love to see that. Amazing. So as you mentioned when we were chatting, the Asociación de Grabadores de Cuba, which was kind of the first thing that we first started chatting about, because it was, as the name suggests, an association of graphic artists in Cuba, but I had never heard of it before. And as I started looking around and doing some Googling on it, I was seeing the incredible images that were made. And as you mentioned, you're in the process of collecting the work and doing some research on it. And I'm wondering if you can just speak to it kind of generally to give people listening an overview about, why it was founded and when, and how you first kind of got involved in this undertaking.
Well, Cuba has a rich history of printmaking dating back to the 1800s. A lot of French printmakers came there and did their work, and over time it started to decline. But printmaking was used for cigar labeling and cigar boxes. Association de Grabadores de Cuba, they started in December of 1949, and the leader of that group was Carmelo Gonzalez, who was also a painter, but he was driving the whole concept of getting printmaking started. So it was himself and 11 other artists, and I could run down their names: Armando Pose, Luis Penlavar, Armando Fernandez, Ana Rosa Guritz, Jose Lopez, Angel Marti Dennis, Eugenio Rodriguez, Rolando Santana, Israel Cordova, and Halobin Lopez. And these are the members that actually formed the group to start, and George Regal. I cannot forget George Regal. So these groups were also interacting in a global printmaking community, because some of the members studied at the Taller de Grafica Popular in Mexico, the Art Students League in New York, Czechoslovakia, Soviet Union, German Democratic Republic, Albania, Republic of China, and all these other countries. And actually probably interacted with some of these well-known artists, but it wasn't captured in any of the history books that I started to search around, except for one particular book in the States that it was a printing organization in Manhattan that created an edition where they compiled all 8 of the books over time. And they speak about Lesbia Vente Dumas, who was a member of the Association de Grabadores, who created these large panel prints that are actually in the collection of UCLA. But it was her and Luis Penlavar and Carmelo Gonzalez that did these large prints that have never been done before on that scale. So, that's the first time I've seen anything about that particular group. And so as they continued to bring printmaking to that notoriety, they started inviting other artists to the country to do some work. And one artist in particular out of the group that struck my mind is George Regal, who studied in Mexico for about 8 years, and you could see the style of his work. You could tell that he's took some of the muralism printmaking styles from there and brought it back to Cuba and exchanged it with the other group members. So it's really cool history.
I know when we were chatting about it earlier, you said it was a bit like maybe the WPA in the States. So were a lot of them commissioned by the government? I mean, is it similar in that way, or just kind of similar in aesthetically? What's the sort of connection there?
For one, I think some of these artists did interact with members from the WPA, based on the fact that Carmelo Gonzalez did study in New York under the Artists League. So, I just know that all this information has been exchanged and brought back, but from the platform, not so much the platform of government support, but more on the sense of the quality, the aesthetic of the work. Because had I not studied some of the African American printmakers, or just American printmakers, and even some of the European printmakers, I would have never developed that eye to see what is masterful work. And so here I am going to Cuba, and I'm looking at the work and I'm like, wow, this is incredible work. But it wasn't until I got into the archives that are in the government and I was actually looking at the equipment. Some of these printmakers developed their own equipment, like they designed it to fit the way they were going to produce the work. And let's think, from 1949 to 68, that was a time embargo was heavy. So Cuba wasn't getting ink. They weren't getting the proper materials. So they had to be creative down to paper. And that's even today. Getting paper is such a difficult thing. And then to maintain and preserve the material is another issue within itself.
Yeah. Is it, now I've never traveled to Cuba or really, I think, anywhere in that part of the world so much. Closest I've been is Florida, of course. But is it quite hot and humid there as well? Because I know when you're talking about preservation and paper, that is such an issue.
Oh no, absolutely. So I again, another part of the research and my studying was collaborating with Enrique Morales Tente. That was the artist that we also talked about, who is a phenomenal artist, part of the Mano Negra group. But I also developed a relationship with Yamilis Barrito, who's the first female of the Taller Experimental de Grafica in Havana, which is the oldest print shop in that area. And she's the first female since I think it was conceived or started back in 1952 or 62. I can't remember offhand, but she actually 62. She was the one that actually allowed me into the archives and go through the work, and some of this stuff was disintegrating in my hands. And I was just like, down to even getting supplies for white gloves to handle the stuff. And then you could see the foxing in the material. So I told her as a project for myself, if she could get me 2 interns, I will come back and photograph and provide several hard drives for them to maintain this stuff and to figure out how we could get wax paper, because the way they have it saved, I mean, and these are works dating back to the 50s and 60s that are just important pieces of work, and they're not gonna sustain if we don't get them into the right space.
So were you able to return with the interns and do that documentation project?
No, I committed to her this past December that I would do it. So we were targeting this December 2020 to do it. So pending on this whole COVID situation, I definitely want to go back and spend at least a week, because I mean, it's files of just beautiful work.
I'm having so much jealousy feelings right now.
Oh, don't be jealous. Go down there. Apartments are like $10 a day, and food is $3 to $7. You could live a really comfortable life there.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely like, my mind's like, what am I doing in December 2021? Can I can I come along? Can I help? Like, it just sounds so incredible.
You let me know, and I'll meet you there, and we'll connect with all the printmakers and people that are influential, and hey, this could be part of your podcast.
Absolutely. I would love that. Because I think that Cuba holds this absolute forbidden fruit quality to, I think, a lot of Americans, in this sense of, back, of course, before COVID, before the insanity that we're in now, there were so few places that were kind of forbidden to travel to. And so when you grow up and it's like, oh, you can't go to Cuba, then of course at least anyone with like my like personality type is like, well, that's where I want to go. That's the only place I want to go,
Exactly. Well, that's the beauty of it. So when I first went down there, on my in early mid 2000s, I was just so amazed because I was watching all the Americans. They're drinking rum, smoking cigars. It was more of a social activity. And I was like, I must be a nerd because I'm going into these bookshops and I'm just like first edition prints. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, nobody's seeing what I'm seeing. And so, people think that, oh, you're American, you're one off. So I'm going to, try to leverage this whole situation because I'll probably never see you again. So when they saw me coming back every 3 months, every 2 months, they were like, wait a minute, this guy is serious.
Yeah.
And I was in their museum. I would sit in the print section of their permanently exhibited works, which I've been fortunate to acquire 8 of those prints. And it's just like, I know in this country, I would never have that opportunity, or rarely have the opportunity to own prints that are permanently exhibited in their national museum. So here I am holding these pieces, and I'm like, I can't believe it. Like, it's just a beautiful thing, and I just want to share it.
it's so wonderful to find something like that in one's life, where you come across something or stumble across something that you get that feeling of, this is incredible and not enough people know about this, and I'm in a position where I can help share it. It's an amazing feeling. And I think that in a way, just being in prints kind of gives you that feeling every day, at least for me, because printmaking is so incredible and so few people know about it. So this is just, a specific example within that whole world of printmaking, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. And the beauty of this all is I'm slightly colorblind. So for
Really?
me, yeah, people are surprised, but and I guess that's why I appreciate the detail more than anything. And, sometimes I might not see a color and I'm just like, well, I can see what the image is communicating. And that's the beauty of prints for me.
Yeah. Since you've gotten to know this association and started doing research into it, what years was it active and why was it disbanded in the end?
The way I really got into a deeper appreciation for it, I went to the Met Museum in New York's library, and I got a library pass, and they had the only collection, I didn't know they had it, the only collection written or book written on this particular group, which was all in Spanish. So I Google translated the entire book.
Oh my gosh.
And so from there, I created a timeline of pieces that I would be interested in acquiring. So I looked up the author of the book, Dr. Olga Nunez, and contacted the National Museum. I said, I need to get in touch with this woman. I need to get a video crew and interview her. And they gave me her location, and Enrique Tente Morales, the printmaker, escorted me to go meet her. We didn't get a crew at that time, so I used my tablet to record the interview in her home. And such an elegant woman, and she knew these individuals and wrote the book in 1983, I believe. And she was just so impressed with me about translating the book. And when I walked in, she gave me a copy and autographed it. And forget about it, I geeked out. My friends are looking at me like, what is wrong with you? I was like, you have no idea what is happening now. Like, this is like people meet the Beatles or somebody. Like, me getting this book from this icon is like mind-blowing, because now I got my own. And then it just triggered me to learn about the history. So the group was active from 1949 to 1968. So they just celebrated their 70th anniversary about 2 years ago. And I was pushing it to try to get it into museums for an exhibition to honor that 70 years. But after reaching out to 80 to 100 print curators, museums, none of them responded. There was no interest. And what the crazy part about it is, I've read so much about all these great collectors like Reba and Dave Williams and Dr. Sims donating their stuff. And I actually was going to give the whole collection. I mean, books, brochures, you name it. I was just going to give it all away. And then, so when I experienced that, I was like, let me take a step back and figure out another way to just get this out there. So they were active from 49 to 1968. Well, in 1968, that's when the revolution had really hit its peak, and the government nationalized all private entities. So the group had their own print space on, I believe it's 908 Neptune, which I actually visited the location, but it's now a residence. And the government basically took over these spaces and controlled it. So then they basically closed shop, and some of them continued to work at the Taller Experimental de Grafica or created their own print shop as their own business, or collaborated with other print shops like Rene Petroreguino print shop in Havana, which is very big on serigraphs and poster making and other printmaking tools. So the last phase before I got to the Association de Grabadores. On the weekends in Havana, it's called Parque Central, Central Park, which is like right downtown, and it's this promenade that goes stretches from the Capitol all the way down to the waterfront called Malecon. So on weekends, there's all these artists that set up their booths and they're showing their works for tourists and locals to buy their work. So a friend of mine, Ralph Sanchez, and I were visiting Cuba at the time, and we're walking by, and we see these prints, and it's like you can't help but to stop. And we're studying them. And I looked at this one piece that I was interested in, and Ralph looked at me. He's like, "Hey, check this piece out." So when I saw the piece, I was just frozen because the way the work is done is the back of someone's head, and you could tell that they're of African descent, but their hair is braided in cornrows, and within the cornrows is a tractor trailer cutting between the rows, and as the hair is going up, it's forming Cuba upside down. I was I was blown away. And shout out to Ralph Sanchez for putting me in that direction because and as I spoke to Enrique, he was explaining how Afro-Cuban life has contributed so much from an economic standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, and anything in Cuba, you cannot remove the Afro-Cuban presence. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And then this is when I knew he was a different caliber of artist because everybody questioned him, like, why are you out here? You don't need to be out here. Like, he was the top of his printmaking class at the San Alejandro Institute, which is where all the artists go through. And here he is in the street. And he said to me, he's like, in order for me to produce work, I got to be in touch with the people. And you can see it in his work. It's like, it's just mind blowing.
You reached out to me originally just to share his work.
Right.
And yeah, and I was completely blown away by it. I know the image that you're speaking of. It's one of the few images of his work that are online. He doesn't have a huge presence. His dry points are unbelievable. Like they're really unlike anything I've ever seen before. And not only are they just technically stunning, but the content of them is so powerful and so smart. And
Right.
it's that kind of perfect storm of talent and it's like talent and content and execution and all of it coming together that you really see rarely in the art world. And so that's why it is incredible to hear that you discovered him just showing his work on the street, in sort of just like a public corridor, because I'm sure we can all picture the kind of work that we usually see when we're in major public spaces in different parts of the world.
Right.
And people,
like touristy areas.
touristy
Yeah.
areas, exactly. And it's usually like fine, and goodness knows I would never want to throw shade on anyone making their living creating visual work, but
Right.
it does not turn your head the way Enrique Tente Morales's work does.
No, the guy's incredible. And there's times when I'm there, I'll sit there for 2 hours and I'll just watch the people's reaction to
I
his work.
bet.
Whether it's from Germany, Europe, and these people will pay $1,000 right there, $1,200 on the spot for his work. But and the beauty of my experience in Cuba, it always circles back. So I'm talking to him, and then I bring up the association. He's like, "Oh, Armando Pose was my professor." Now, Armando Pose was one of the founding members of the group and also of the Taller Experimental de Grafica. So right there, I was like, iron sharpens iron. Like, this man learned from one of the greats and turned around and is producing masterful work. And again, it's like he doesn't have that platform, which I'm working with him on to connect him with the right people because he's brilliant. He's just a brilliant artist.
And then so you two sort of started to collaborate on collecting and preserving the works that were produced in the association. Is that correct?
Yes. So basically, I continue to go down there, go to their libraries, go to their archives. Your Millis was instrumental in connecting me with the right people. Then I met Lesbia. So there's four living members still of the group. Umberto Pena, who's located in Spain, Cesar Mazzola, who's living in Mexico, uh, Alfredo Soso Bravo and Lesbia are the only two living in Cuba. So I had the chance to meet Lesbia, who actually has the Carmelo Gonzalez collection. And so I basically connected with her, interviewed her, and then said, listen, I'd like to interview the other members. So just by chance, she was able to contact Soso Bravo, and Cesar Mazzola was going to be honored in Cuba. So he was actually flying out there. And I got Dr. Olga Nunez, the author of the book, to come. So I hired a film crew. We did the interview with the Amelies, and she moderated it and asked questions about the group. And there's information that just was coming out, all this in Spanish. But after the fact, I was learning that a lot of information came out that wasn't in the book. So I told Dr. Nunez I would like to republish the book and create a second edition and add the information and also add the prints that weren't exhibited in the first book. So everybody's on board. Now it's just a matter of how do we execute and get it done, because most of them are up in age. And so that's the big struggle, but I got a video of these last three living members, and I actually sent Umberto Pena a document to respond to questions, and he actually responded back to those. So now I'm in the phase of actually archiving paper interviews, all the video interviews, any documentation that I had, even my tickets to fly there, passport stamps, because I didn't realize the importance of it. And I was like, I want to actually let somebody see how I went about doing it. And just, there's other places in the world that's just still undiscovered talent. And in printmaking, where there's Thailand rubbings, which they don't do anymore, that got banned in the 70s. And I lucked out and got a print of that. But, I just want people to think beyond just the scope of mainstream, to actually get into the community, talk to people, and find where prints are, find where these undiscovered masterpieces are, and try to bring them up to the global status of printmaking.
It really brings to the forefront in my mind this idea that because we have the internet, because we have artsy printmaking Instagram that you can follow and see great artists every day on, because we've got all these connections and print groups on Facebook with 26,000 people, we get this illusion that we know global printmaking, that we can know it just from sitting behind our desktops.
Right.
But of course we can't, because so much of the world doesn't champion and privilege this, you got to make it digital or it didn't happen. I think that's just a very Western, very American attitude, where you'll find incredible artists throughout the world who, like Enrique, who don't even have an Instagram. They're not thinking that way. It's this the capitalism is so much the water that we're born into and the water that we swim in, that we don't understand that it's there. And it's like, if you're not promoting yourself, how are you even making work? Is this,
right.
They're one in the same in our mentality. And because of that, I don't think it occurs to us sometimes the incredible talents and the incredible variety of work that's going on outside of that scope and outside of that mentality in the world.
No, absolutely. And that's where, even in the book that I'm writing, I'm trying to articulate that the museums, I think, should actually look at hiring somebody as an outsider to go out and look at prints, look at different artwork, and actually bring it back to the group and present it. Because I think, curators are overwhelmed. So, but I think a lot of the times they don't have the time to travel and go to these different spaces to find these masterpieces, or even considering it. Because I just went to a print discussion where I cannot remember the person's name that was responsible for Latin American art in Houston, I believe. And she's now trying to collect Puerto Rican prints from older periods and contemporary periods.
Mm-hmm.
And the number one problem they're having is when they find these prints, some of them are hammered to the doors of people's houses outside. So the foxing, the
Yeah.
moisture ruins these works from the 60s. So they're having a difficult time finding these works. So I think, getting an expert in these spaces to go out and do the work. I'm not saying create an elaborate budget, because I did it on a very slim budget because I hadn't had a job in 4 years.
Mm.
And I was making money just by selling masterpieces of Belkacem Sayon's work and other people, because it was very difficult to find.
So you mentioned just in passing there the book that you're writing, which I'd love to talk about, but just from hearing you talk about all your experiences in Cuba, I'm like, you should write a book. You need to write a book about the association, the Asociación de Grabadores de Cuba, because it sounds like almost everything that's written is in Spanish. So yeah, I'm just going to put more work on your plate. I'm going to volunteer you for that. Yeah.
I appreciate the encouragement. No, I definitely, I don't know if I'll be a contributing writer. Maybe I might write a preface, but if everything works out, because that's what I articulated to Dr. Olga Nunez, that if we could reprint this book and add the information and also do it bilingually, Spanish and English, and then include the images from the exhibition in 1983, then we could have a masterpiece in our hands, And so that's what I'm working on. Hopefully it works, because, I think with the changes now, it's just a little difficult. So hopefully it opens up.
Yeah. But so the book that you are writing, you mentioned you're writing a book about art collecting. Tell me a bit about that.
Yes. The art collecting, I'm definitely going to have it from the perspective of collectors and just my experience. Other people have different strategies, techniques, and relationships that they want or don't want with the artist. So I'm going to really talk about my experiences and just talking about operating, I'm trying to find a good term to say it, but a hunter-gatherer type of structure. So when I would find certain artists in the States, and I like Terry Bodie is one artist, and I sent it out to my friends. I'm like, this guy is really impressive. He's a professor at NYU. I was like, let me set up a joint trip and we'll all go over to his studio and take a look at his work. So, 3 of us went over there and each of us liked a piece. And so we were able to negotiate a really good price with him. And then now we're giving continued support by spreading the word, people seeing the works at the house, because he did these beautiful canotype prints of a project building and slave ships under it, which is basically the funneling of the Black experience of oppression and lack of resources and how just the structure globally treats it. So when I saw this, and I actually saw it in a book, a Caribbean exhibition, I think it took place at the Brooklyn Museum. So I reached out to him. I was like, do you still have this print? He's like, I got one more left. And I was able to acquire this print that's in the book. And I look at it, I'm like, the blue and the white just really, blue's a calming color, and I could actually see it. So it's just like Terry is a really impressive printmaker, So, just teaching people, just like going out with groups, not being afraid to do the studio visits, go to auction, because I want to actually, in parallel to the book, I actually want to do tours to museums and auction houses to eliminate this illusion, because, most of us grew up watching TV. So when you see some rich people throwing up a paddle and they're spending millions of dollars,
Right.
that could be a deterrent. And I remember my first time going to a print auction at Sotheby's. it's like 10 people in the room.
Mm,
And usually you see it a full house, and then I'm watching the numbers and the phones, and it's just like, wow, it's not really what I thought it was based on what I grew up seeing on TV.
right.
So I
Right.
want to kind of get everybody comfortable, like going to an auction and, the pre going through the experience of looking at an Andy Warhol print or a Katie Kalowitz or a David Hammond's print, like just getting comfortable in the environment. Because I think once you become comfortable in the environment, then you could navigate around it more fluidly and more comfortably, especially if you go with a group of people you're comfortable with.
And that's something that people really don't realize, I think, at least from my point of view, that really truly hurts the art world in general, I think quite profoundly, is that the only way that it's portrayed in the media, as you say, is rich people holding up paddles spending millions of dollars. And 99.9% of people can't identify with that. They don't see themselves in that. They don't see themselves in that room. They think that that's how art is purchased and that there's
Correct.
no other options. And so it's really important work to break down those assumptions and for people to understand that if you can if you can buy yourself a nice dinner or a nice pair of shoes, you can buy yourself a print that you're going to love for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And also with that myth of millionaire people, because then artists are like, man, if these guys have millions of dollars to spend, then maybe they'll buy my work. And I also in the book want to capture the artist side of things and what artists should be looking for from collectors, because sometimes we get enamored with looking at the art news 200 top collectors, and
Right.
none of them are print collectors, and there's only been one, and it was a couple out in I believe in Texas that collected prints, but nobody's talking about Jordan Schnitzer who's opened
Right.
museums on prints. Like, and so and when you look at all these people's jobs, it's like real estate investor, philanthropy, which means they
Mm-hmm.
inherited money. So I want to get both sides of the equation in this book. Like, I want artists to understand, like, it's a partnership. It's just not a one-off buy. Some of these collectors are on boards. Some of them have influence in the art world. To how can they support you? Like, there's artists that I've worked with that they didn't even know how to negotiate with the museum. And I
Right.
said, let me propose something. I'll donate an artwork on your behalf, but I want the museum to do a catalog for your work. And they
Yep.
looked at me like, really? I was like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, let me get in touch with who you're talking to. And then some of them will pass on the donation of the artwork and will be happy to do the catalog. And so the catalog costs me less to do as opposed to giving an artwork away. So it's a win-win for me, because I think not only is your body of work important, I think people that do research, because I like when I look at Anna Mendieta, when I went to the Met Museum Library, there were dissertations done on her work, her body prints. Like, and I was just like, wow, I didn't even think it would be at that level. So these dissertations evolve into books. So, hopefully this is be the same thing for the Association de Grabadores of Cuba, that maybe it'll inspire people to dig deeper and go to Czechoslovakia, Russia, and see what's in the archives and try to dig it up. Because I actually, through the internet, got in touch because I know that some of the group members exhibited in Brazil, and they exhibited at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., Dallas, Texas. So I was able to get in touch with people that actually told me there's images available. So I have to make trips to these locations to capture that information. But you would have never known that they were in these spaces.
And I think what you're talking about too with that kind of negotiation with museums and that sort of thing, that is such a hidden part of the art world from the artist's point of view. And I feel like when you're talking about the experience you had where you reached out to 80 or 100 institutions and didn't even hear back from one,
Well, some of
you
them
know?
go. Not interested.
Okay, got it. So you got some response, but yeah, so you didn't
Very
hear any
few.
positive responses. Yeah.
And the all and so there's two positive results that just recently came.
Yeah.
So going back to the one book, African American uh, um, prints from 1838 to, oh gosh, what year? 1838 to present, which was African American printmaking that was done at Rockland Community College. And my mentor, Dr. Edmund Gordon, who was Charles White's dear friend, was in this book. So as I was going through it, I was like, man, I got to look up the curator. So that's where Lena Hugh and Dr. Cynthia Hawkins came up. So Miss Hugh was not available. She retired. So I tracked down Dr. Cynthia Hawkins at the SUNY, the State University of New York University, Geneseo. So I wrote her and sent her my whole catalog on the prints, and she was like, I would be interested in doing it. So again, she was a trailblazer in giving the platform for the African American printmaking. Here she is doing it again. So I'm excited. So that exhibition should be taking place September 2022, and she gave me the whole gallery,
Ah,
the whole thing.
beautiful.
Which I'm just looking forward to it. I'm gonna have invites. If you're in the States, I would love you to be
Oh,
there.
I'd love that.
So I really want to get it promoted that way, and I want to backtrack to a story. So remember, I was talking about Like It Is and how Charles
Uh-huh.
White would flash to the screen. So when I met Dr. Edmund Gordon and Dr. Sue Gordon, his wife, rest in peace. Dr. Edmund Gordon is 97 years old. Beautiful spirit. He wrote a letter for me to do continuous work in Cuba regarding this particular print group. So he told me a story that after the first season of Like It Is with Gil Noble, ABC was going to cancel it unless they could raise close to $7 million. And this is dating back to the 60s.
Yeah.
Dr. Edmund Gordon, former Mayor David Dinkins, and several individuals raised the funds to get that sponsorship.
Oh,
And he asked Mr. Gil Noble, he's like, we're going to do this for you. The only thing I ask you to do is get Charlie's work on your show. And that's why the drumming and the vision of Charles White's work flashing to the TV came about. Dr. Edmund Gordon. So these are the type of people I admire because they sacrifice to make sure somebody else gets to get that level of exposure. And look at Charles White now.
you're
I mean,
right.
during my time at MoMA, we did a whole retrospective on him, and that traveled to California, Chicago. It was a fantastic exhibition.
That is so beautiful. I just got goosebumps listening to that story because it's so wonderful when people use platforms that way, and the incredible power of just having one or two people in the right place believe in your work. It's
Absolutely.
amazing. It's
Absolutely.
amazing. Do you happen to know which Charles White print it was? I bet I could Google it and probably find it out, but I'd love to include it. I usually, on the website, I'll put a collection of images together that go with the podcast release. So maybe I'll have to figure out which one it is so I can add it to the collection of images that I'll add with this one.
I will try to dig into it because you could look up Like It Is Gil Noble, but they never showed the introduction piece. So I'll have to see if I could dig it in through libraries, but I'll send it to you. But I know it was a picture of a man's face. And when it came to the screen, I was like, oh my goodness. And that was in elementary school. That's going back like almost 35 years ago. And I still could see it. I could hear the drums. And the content that was produced on this show was by far the most influential thing and impactful thing in my life when it comes to just culture, African American or African diaspora culture.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was at Davidson, we had a handful of Charles White's prints, and they're so beautiful. But I think that our sort of hometown African American printmaking hero is, of course, Jacob Lawrence.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
when I was there, I had the honor and the pleasure of putting on a couple of Jacob Lawrence exhibitions from some local collectors as well. And just really incredible work. And again, something that someone who I feel like Charles Wright, like maybe broke a little bit out of the printmaking bubble, became to be known, outside of just us print nerds, but still not nearly widely enough recognized. I think both artists deserve so much more. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. And I'm actually currently working on a exhibition for Charles White, but we're also including the people that influenced Charles White and the artists that came after him. So we're going to be exhibiting, we're still trying to figure out his mentors, but we're going to exhibit works from his peers, and of course his students. And one piece I know that we're going to be exhibiting Kerry James Marshall woodcut during that exhibition. And so I'm excited about it because it's allowing me to dig deeper into his experiences and learning more about the history. And hopefully it'll work out because we're looking to do it this year in October at the Rockland Art Center, which is located in West Nyack. So hoping everything comes out because we already have a lineup of works available to be exhibited.
Yeah, fingers crossed for that, for sure. Well, we're coming up on the hour recording mark here, and I just wanted to make sure that you got a chance to talk about any upcoming events that are on the horizon, because we've got the exhibition in 2022, or was it 2022 or 2021?
2022 is the Association of Gravadors in upstate New York.
Okay. And then, fingers crossed, as we said, for the Charles White this October. Was there anything else that you want to plug that people can keep their eye out for?
Well, right now, in association with the Association de Grabadores de Cuba, Belkis Ayan, a contemporary printmaker, she passed away, is currently exhibiting in Chicago, and she actually curated an exhibition for the Association de Grabadores de Cuba. So I actually sent it to the Belkis Ayan estate to share that I had this brochure and they didn't have it in their collection. So I'm trying to help contribute to her collection of works because she's phenomenal. But I know we talked about, or we wrote about current contemporary printmakers in Cuba that are making huge strides. And you have Eduardo Choca Roca, who just won the national award in Cuba. And also Lesbia Vente Dumas just won the national award for printmaking down there as well as of 2019. Other fantastic printmakers, Angel Ramirez, who I actually have a work that he collaborated with Belkis Ayan, a huge print called Dando y Dando, which is going to be submitted to the Sao Paulo Brazilian Biennial for exhibition. Other key printmakers, Yamilis Barrito, Jacqueline Barrito, Sandra Ramos, Isolina Limonota, of course, Enrique Tente Morales, Ibrahim Miranda. Like, there's just a whole host of great printmakers in Cuba.
Yeah.
Just phenomenal works.
Yeah, I feel like we'll need to have you back on the podcast just to talk about contemporary Cuban printmaking, because we spent we spent so much time talking about historical works as well, and the research you're doing. So yeah, before we sign off, where would be the best way for people to follow your work or see the promotions and reminders of the exhibitions that are coming up? Do you have any platforms that you want to push that people can learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, I'm only on Instagram, and it's at @ART_patron, PATRON. So I post different images on printmaking, sometimes paintings, but I try to focus more on printmaking. And eventually I'll be developing a website that will capture what prints I have to kind of give it some context and, let people explore it virtually through the internet. So that's the next phase.
That would be amazing. I will definitely look forward to that. And thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. It absolutely made my heart feel lighter, and it was very needed on this end of the mic to just have a beautiful chat like this. And I sincerely hope we can do it again, and we can stay in touch. And please let me know if I can help support what you're doing in any way.
Well, likewise, and thank you, because this is the first time I've ever thought to do a podcast. I'm very private, so I appreciate your energy, your willingness to have this conversation, and it's reciprocal. If there's anything I could do to push the movement to help support, I definitely will.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much again, and please take care, and let's stay in touch.
All right, we'll do the same.
Okay, have a great evening, Newton.
All right, thank you, Miranda. Appreciate it.
Yeah, bye now.
All right, bye.
Well, that's our show for this week. And by the way, print friends, that Charles White exhibition he mentioned, it did end up being rescheduled. So look for that in February 2021. And join me next week when my guest will be Kitikon Tilakwatanotai. Kitikon has been much talked about on our podcast before by past guests and myself, because truly all printmaking roads here in the Eastern Hemisphere eventually lead to his print studio in Chiang Mai, Thailand. We'll talk about how he got started in his studio apartment, saving up to buy his own shop, studying abroad in Sydney, and his big plans for the future. I'm super excited to share this one because, in a number of ways, there never would have been a Pine Copper Lime if there was no Kitikon. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing help from Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.